Hey everyone, my name is Atish. I'm a producer, DJ, and label guy based out of New York City, and today we're going to do a walkthrough of a track of mine called Cocoa Buggy. It just came out on Kiosk I.D, which is the Berlin Kotzerblau label, which is one of my favorite clubs to play in the world, and it's also part of Mira's birthday compilation. This is really special because I've played Mira's birthday party at Kotzerblau, and it was one of the best gigs of my life, so being a part of this compilation is super special to me. Beyond that, before we get into the weeds, this track falls in line with this philosophy I have, which is quantity over quality when it comes to creating work. And I won't get into the weeds on that, but one of the ideas that derives from quantity over quality is that it's important to try and finish your work under all odds, rather than having half-finished pieces of work that maybe you're not excited about. In this case, where this track went didn't really align with the EP I was trying to create for my own Manjumasi label, but I stuck with the quantity over quality, finish your work ethos, and I finished this until its end. It ended up sitting in my archives for a little while. I didn't end up signing it, but lo and behold, one day Mira drops me a message saying, "Hey, I'm doing this compilation album for my birthday. I need a track from you in 1 week." 1 week is not enough time for me to finish the track, but because I subscribe to this finish your work, quantity over quality idea, I had this track in my archives ready to go. I delivered it. Moral of the story is finish as much work as you possibly can, even if you don't love it. In this case, I love it, but even if you don't love it, even if it doesn't align exactly with what you're trying to do, it's important to finish your creative work, and sometimes good things come out of the output. Or are the output. Okay, so enough of that. Let's jump into Ableton right now and talk a little bit about Cocoa Buggy. Let's just look at the meat of the groove and the track just to get a feel for what it sounds like. So I'm gonna jump, let's say right here. Okay, so that's the general idea of the vibe of the track. There's some other elements that come in and out, but just to start, let's dissect what the groove is all about in this track. So to start, I do a lot of groupings in my tracks, so let's start with this bass group here. So first we have the bass drum. And I'm using Bassism here. It's a plugin I like. It gives me a lot of room and flexibility to shape my kicks. I also alternate with Kick 2. That's another bass drum kick sound shaper. But super simple here. And then I have a second bass drum. I like to have a couple, sometimes two, sometimes three bass drums kind of interplaying off one another. This usually makes for a more interesting groove, or at least for the types of music that I like listening to and I like playing. And then we jump into this low bass. This is the first bass sound. This is using Omnisphere and just a little compression, some sidechain. Okay, that's the first bass line. Now the second bass line is this one. This is using Diva. Have a little bit of saturation on there. Now, both these bass lines on their own are not particularly interesting, but similar to how we have both kicks playing against one another, I like to have different bass lines playing against one another. I think this is more sonically interesting, but more importantly, I love the idea of call and response. It's kind of a fundamental idea in music that we've heard for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So here I have a call and response going between both my different bass sounds. Now, if we just hear that with the rest of the kick, I just solo my bass section. So yeah, that's a basic idea of how call and response is working. I have 4 different bass sounds all interplaying with one another, not really stepping on each other too much. And this is an idea that doesn't just apply to bass sounds, it applies to percussion, it applies to melodic elements, especially melodies, having 2 different sounds playing off one another. So overall, this is a pretty stripped down track. There's not a whole lot to, really dissect into percussion, but we'll just jump through it really quickly. I have 2 hi-hat sounds, one that's panned left a little bit, one that's panned right. The right one has a slight delay on it to give it a bit of a wide feel. And the right one has a second hi-hat hit just to give it a little bit of very small, subtle complexity so it doesn't feel too straight ahead. Then, a third hi-hat sound, an open hi-hat. Oops, let's solo all of these. So here I have 4 hi-hat sounds going on. It's actually a pretty stripped down track. It's a pretty stripped down groove. But again, similar to the bass sounds, I like to have different textures playing off one another. It's more engaging to the ear. It's more interesting. And I think it keeps the listener engaged for a little bit longer. Let's see. Here, a little shaker loop comes in. This is kind of adding suspense and gluing 2 sections together from an arrangement perspective. And then I have another shaker here. Then another shaker. So yeah, once again, having different elements interplaying off one another, not trying to use the same sample, repeatedly to fill my space. So snares, I have 2 different snares playing off one another. And then I have, a couple other percussion sounds. Let's just solo the entire thing. Let's solo my perc section. And we can hear the clave and the rims coming in a little bit here. Yep. So just to hear that really quickly. Jumping a little further, because this is a very sparse track in the groove, I use other things to fill the space that's not necessarily percussion or not necessarily melody. I have a few different layers of noise that I use in different places. In this case, this is just a straight up noise sample. We can hear this here. It has a very, very heavy delay on it. And then let's just look at a couple other noise sounds. Here I'm using noise as an element to build suspense. It's actually a shaker that's distorted. And then we won't go into all the noise sounds, but generally, once again, different types of textures, in many ways serving similar purposes, but varying them so they don't sound super monotonous and super the same. Let's jump into this one. This is called Pingy Pluck. This is an Omnisphere patch, and I'm automating the hard sync parameter. Let's see if I can open Omnisphere. Sometimes it doesn't open. Okay, this time it didn't open. But slowly over the course of the track, automating this so the synth doesn't always sound the same and it doesn't sound loopy. Automation, whether it's modifying the wave shape of your synth or having a filter come in and out or any of these types of things, makes your track feel like it has movement and it doesn't feel loopy. All right, jumping down, this is kind of one of the lead sounds. I believe this is Ableton's Collision. And then we jump into the pads here. I like CS80V. This is part of the Arturia collection. It has some nice pad sounds. And this is what also fills in the space. It's a sparse track, so I like having big washy pads to give a little bit of an emo feel. And we can see I'm automating the filter here so it doesn't sound super straight. There's also some tremolo going on. I like to increase the tremolo as the synth finishes off, and it just gives it a little bit of movement and a little bit of life as well. And then this is kind of interesting. So this is the Rise resonator sound. It's somewhere between a melodic and a percussive sound, and let's just dissect into how I got this sound. So I'm going to turn off the resonator, and I'm going to turn off the echo, and that should be enough to start. So it's this distorted ride sound, but when I throw a resonator on there, and I throw this echo back on there, now it has a pretty unique, unpredictable type of texture, type of melodic element, and walks that line in between. And it's, from an arrangement perspective, I throw it in here. I don't have it running all the time. And when I use it sparingly and use it in different places, it makes a loop feel less loopy. So let's just hear it in the track. And you can see here that I am automating the frequency, so it's getting some movement there as well. Okay, so now let's jump down to the craziest part of the track. I was on the fence about whether I wanted to include this or not. It's the organ solo. Let's just hear that really quick. So that's the organ solo. So from a creative aspect, I wasn't sure whether or not to include this since it's kind of out of the box of what you normally hear in house music. But ultimately I decided without a crazy organ solo like this, it would maybe get lost in the shuffle of all these tracks that sound like each other. But if I had this wild organ solo, it would be a nice differentiator and maybe make the track a little bit more memorable. So this is just a personal thing, but when I'm on the fence of whether or not I should include something or not include something, because it might be too weird. Generally, if it's weirder, I'll keep it in because it's so hard to differentiate music from everything else and all the noise that's coming out. Of course, it could turn people off because it's so far out of the box, but that's just a personal call that you have to make. One interesting thing about this texture is here I'm using this max LFO patch, and I have that controlling the frequency shifter, the fine parameter here. And this is a way for me to give the organ a little bit of vibrato. And then my depth parameter, I choose how hard I want the vibrato to actually vibrate. And we see a really extreme example of this in the way this solo ends. If we just look at this automated parameter here. Kind of sounds like it's going into outer space. Now the reason I did that, combined with a heavy reverb, is I was having trouble gluing these two sections together. I mean, I have this organ that comes out of nowhere, then I want to get back into the groove, and I found that just kind of going buck wild with it, saying, hey, this is the end of the solo, we've gone super crazy with it, and here's a big reverb tail to wash it out. This, I think, glued the two sections together arrangement-wise. So let's just hear it with the rest of the groove. So, yeah, I think that kind of worked, and I was happy that I was able to keep the solo in, and Mira liked the solo too. She said it has this Kotter kind of tripped out morning vibe, so that was pretty cool. And then just the last thing, I use a lot of resampling, which is I'll capture the output from some parts and reuse them in other ways later on. So here, I captured a delay output from my organ, and I layered that on top as well. So if we just listen to that. And then you can see, with my macro, I'm reducing the volume here. And I also do some other things like that. If I can find it, I believe right here. So I have this thing. So that, I captured the echo. And I did I changed the delay time and I slowed it down. We gave it that woo, 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 woo kind of sound. And I wanted to make sure I had that captured. I want to make sure I have that captured because I was still tweaking around with the parameters in my original sound, which was this. but I didn't want to lose that nice delay tripped out thing that happened to be perfectly in time. So I captured this to another track and I printed it to make sure I never lost this ever again. So that's a common thing I do in many of my tracks. And it also opens up doors for doing a lot of manipulation. You know, I can reverb this, I can transpose it, I can, shorten the time, I can lengthen the time. So capturing the output of other tracks is a great way to spawn new creative ideas or to manipulate them in ways that aren't always possible when you're working with your MIDI roll. So overall, I hope you found this quick little walkthrough helpful. Hopefully it shaped a few ideas on how you can approach your groove or textures or arrangement or interplay. And if you found that helpful, you can always check me out on Instagram. You can check out my YouTube channel. I do a lot of videos like this. And I wish you the best of luck in your producing. Bye.